Welcome back. Welcome back to Humanities 4 Film Studies, Shasta College. Tonight we're going to be talking about women directors. And there's a long history of women directors, believe it or not. They go back to the silent era. For those not familiar with those old movies, had a different trajectory than most male directors, and they still have a difficult time getting their films made. But there are inroads. Anyway, I hope everybody out there is safe and doing the wise thing and not congregating in large groups and yada, yada, yada. You know the drill by now. Staying safe, staying away from people, which is easy for me. And we keep moving on. And the class is thriving. I know it is. I haven't got to your newest papers, but I'm getting close, awfully close. Anyway, I hope everything's going well. I will assign something towards the end of the week. And then I'll make an announcement towards the end of the week to try to give you a heads up of how we're gonna finish the course. We're gonna go off course from the syllabus, so be ready for that. We probably won't do all the essays, but you will probably do a research paper that I'll probably let you. I'll sign it this week, and you'll have a whole month to do it, along with your journal and this next essay. That might be it. We'll see what happens. But I'll talk about that later. So I know a lot of you are piping in right now because you're having a hard time with the technical stuff. Shasta College now has a program. Maybe you're aware of it. They got a bunch of Chromebooks, and they have a lending. You have to sign up for it though, and if you don't have a new laptop or you're doing everything on your cell phone, don't keep suffering with it. Contact Shasta College. Contact the humanities department, and they will direct you how to get your hands on one of these Chrome notebooks, because we're going to be in this mode for quite a while. It's not going to go away for a while, at least not through summer. Summer school is going to be all online. So I would get the Chromebook. And as far as I know, they're fairly easy to get, but you got to sign up for them. So research that, find out how to do it, and get your own Chromebook. So do that. Keep working on what you're working on it, and try to keep participating. I know it seems like we're not forced to be in the class together, and so far I haven't done any of those Zoom. I don't know if I'm going to do those. Maybe I'll do one before we're done, where we all try to meet on Zoom if it's possible. But I know a lot of people don't have the technical abilities, and so it's going to be frustrating for some people. I understand your frustration. Anyway, keep the faith, and we'll get through this thing somehow. But today, let's talk about movies. Did you guys see any movies this week that was interesting? And remember, the keyword is interesting. I saw a brand new movie last night. They're starting to release newer movies on some of these streaming services now. Well, like for example, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood has now been released on Amazon. You can watch that. I watched it again. I'm still not in love with it. I still think Leonardo DiCaprio was overacting in every scene. Brad Pitt's very fine in it. He won his Oscar, and I think he was deserving of it. She's good. The girl, Margot, as Sharon, the ill-fated Sharon Tate, although she's not ill-fated in the movie. Just thought I'd spoiler alert, folks. She doesn't live like she does in the movies. She dies. And I'm reading a great book right now about the movie Chinatown. Maybe when you research the 70s, Chinatown was an epic, groundbreaking film directed by Roman Polanski. The last film he directed before he fled the country under a cloud of he was convicted of a felony of having sex with an underage girl, not of a rape, but having sex with a 13-year-old, I believe. and he pled guilty, and he had already spent some time in jail. And then they got a new judge who seemed to be kind of vindictive and was going to maybe sentence him to really hard time, 4 or 5 years. And so Roman fled the country in 1975 or so, and he hasn't been back since. And he's still making movies. He lives in Switzerland. He's still making movies. And there's controversy around it because he did. I'm reading this book right now about the making of Chinatown. And his wife was the wife that was killed by the Charles Manson gang. And she was pregnant, almost 9 months pregnant with his baby also. And his world got tore out from under him. And he's probably never recovered. This is a guy who also escaped the Nazis when he's a child in Germany. All his family, most of his family was killed in the concentration camps. So we're talking about a painful, painful history. And he never was the same again after his beloved wife was murdered and slaughtered, essentially, and his child, unborn child. And he left the country and couldn't come back. He couldn't live here anymore. He had a big success with Rosemary's Baby, and he was digging the LA scene at the time. Sunset Strip was going strong. Flower Power was in full bloom. The Doors were playing at the Whiskey A Go Go, and Jack Nicholson had just done Easy Rider, and he was getting power. And they're having a groovy time living up in the hills. Warren Beatty had just done Bonnie and Clyde, and his power was ascending. Robert Evans, the producer who produced Godfather and would produce Chinatown, they were the golden boys of the 1970s. Yeah, they were handsome and good looking, and they had piles of money and piles of cocaine, and they partied like there was no tomorrow. And a lot of it was at Roman's house until Sharon Tate was murdered. Then he fled the country because he said he could never live here again. The dream was over. He made a great comment in there, and I really stuck with me. He said 2 defining things that defined the American dream and the American nightmare all at once. One was Hollywood during the golden era, and the moon landing. The moon landing and the murder, the savage murder by the Manson families, all took place the same year, and the dream was over. He feels that the Manson family legacy and the death of his wife and others, they killed many other people, defines us just as much as the Kennedy assassination or the moon landing. And I think that's pretty good. I think I agree with that. We've never really gotten over it. We still talk about it. We still make movies about it. Our innocence ended. Not just when I get into documentaries, you'll see our innocence ended at Altamont Speedway, and I'll talk about that later. But also our innocence ended with the Charles Manson gang doing their ugly deeds. And things changed. The drugs changed, the attitudes changed, the paranoia grew, and Hollywood changed big time. Everybody was paranoid, as well they should be, for good cause. They thought they were being stalked. Celebrities are going to be killed by these renegade, savage hippies, and everything changed. It became a walled community. Great book I'm reading. Highly recommend it. It's called The Big Goodbye. Just came out this year. Anyway, but today I want to talk about women in Hollywood, women directors. And they go back to the silent era. You want to go back to the silent era. There was a woman named, where's her name here? Excuse me. Let me find her name here. And I've actually seen some of her movies. She was a very popular director. Why can't I see her name right here? Lois Weber. She actually had her own movie studio. She was powerful. She directed, like, most of these movies have been destroyed over the years. They have not lasted. You can't find very many of them. but there are outlets out there to find it. You can see some of her clips on YouTube, Lois Weber, and she was actually making movies about subjects close to women, like abortions, believe it or not, in the silent era, and women's rights, and women not wanting to live under the thumb of a domineering male world. And Louise was making these movies, and she was Lois, rather. She was making movies, and they're making money. And so it just wasn't a male club, although it was that. And there were other directors through that era, but they didn't last, and they mostly died as a small footnote to history. And in the 1940s, there was an actress named Ida Lupino, and she had done some incredible movies. She usually played kind of a femme fatale in her movies. You know what that is by now. By reading and seeing the film noir movies. She's in a great movie called High Sierra with Humphrey Bogart. She's his love interest, and she's hardened, dedicated woman who loves her man, even though he's a renegade criminal, but he has a human spirit. The great Raoul Walsh directed that, by the way. I would seek it out. One of Humphrey Bogart's first movies. And first one that made him a star. He had been making movies for many years, but that one was one that really put him on the map when it came to leading man. And he was an unconventional leading man. He wasn't tall, dark, and handsome. He wasn't, but he became a huge movie star of another era, the 40s and early 50s for sure. With Casablanca, and To Have and to Have Not, Africa Queen, which he won the Oscar for. Very offbeat, wonderful personality, unique to Hollywood films, and made some great film noirs like The Big Sleep and The Maltese Falcon. Maybe when you're researching the film noir, you might have come across those two movies. Excellent movies, both. So Ida was an actress, but she was chomping at the bit. She wanted to do something more. She wanted to express her creativity more. And of course, it's a boys' club. It's not going to happen. But because somebody got sick and she took over a couple of days of directing on a film she was acting in, she got to finally come up and direct. And then in the late 40s, early 50s, she had a production company. And with her husband, Howard Duff, who was an actor, and she directed several movies. Really good one. You can watch it now on YouTube. It's called Hitchhiker. It's literally three people. That's it. Here's what you do, folks. When you don't have any money, you get three of your acting friends, you get a car, a couple guns, and you go out to the Mojave Desert, which is what she did. And she made an entire feature film out there called Hitchhiker. Two guys are on a fishing trip. What they're doing out in the Mojave Desert, I have no idea. There's no water out there, but that's where they filmed it. And they pick up the hitchhiker. Big mistake, because he's got a gun. He's a mad dog serial killer on the run. And now for the rest of the 2-hour movie, you don't know if he's going to kill these two guys, how they're going to get away from him. And they play a cat and mouse game throughout the rest of the movie. It's a great little film noir, filmed for next to nothing. And then she directed several films after that. The Bigamist, about a guy who was married to more than one woman. And so these were tough themes. And she was known to have a no-nonsense flair and in her directing capabilities. And that appealed to the male crews that worked with her, because they're tough guys. And they don't like somebody coming into their realm who they don't respect. And they're used to other tough-minded directors, men. And these guys accepted a little diminutive Ida, and she made these films. And later on, she had a pretty successful career once the film career didn't really take off that well. But she directed for television. She did a lot of TV work. She even directed an episode of Gilligan's Island. So her career kept going up. And even though the projects were not what you might call A movies, they were kind of like whatever she could get in television. And then her last acting job was in a Sam Peckinpah movie called Junior Bonner. And so she's an interesting woman. Check her out, Ida Lupino. I'll put all this stuff in the discussion because maybe we'll discuss these directors or maybe you write a paper about it. I haven't decided. And anyway, so there's Ida Lupino coming up in the late 60s, early 60s. There was a kind of a trust fund woman named Shirley Clark, and she had made some experimental fiction, for her friends, but then playing movie theaters. And then there was a play at the time called The Connection. The Connection played off Broadway in New York City in the late 50s about musicians, jazz musicians, which was popular in those times, and New York, Hell's Kitchen, and they're waiting for their drug connection. They're waiting for the man, as Lou Reed would sing later on in his song, Waiting for the Man. If you know the Velvet Underground, check it out. So she got the rights to do this play, and she made a very good movie. They actually had a bit of a budget. It's filmed in 35 millimeter, and it's filmed like a documentary. If you can go watch it right now, maybe I'll make you watch it. We'll see. Maybe I'll write about that. It's on YouTube. It's called The Connection. Brilliant black and white. And the controversy at the time was they used real jazz musicians and other people that were professional actors. And the whole thing takes place in one room as they're waiting for the drug connection to show up. And when he does, boy, are they happy. They all can't wait to get to the bathroom and do their thing. But in the production of the play, they used real jazz musicians also on stage because there's a jazz band on stage. And supposedly, if it's an urban myth or not, the junkies in the play were actually shooting up heroin on stage. They got shut down several times by the authorities. A lot of they said they were faking that and they weren't shooting up heroin. They're just faking shooting up, but they were busted anyway. Anyway, heroin was a big deal in New York City at the time in the art scenes and especially in jazz world. So it's a gritty little film. It's got a lot of humor in it, and the photography is great. Check it out, The Connection. Shirley Clark went on to make another semi-documentary movie called The Cool World, about kids growing up in Harlem, filmed in Harlem. And later on, she had trouble finding financing. She always had that trouble, so she made a lot of shorts. You can probably see most of them on YouTube. But she was making movies, for the rest of her life. And then she went into video when that became popular. And she died in the 90s. But she was one of the first, I guess you would call it, art film independent women with, that never really broke into the mainstream at all. But she has a very interesting reputation, and she's an inspiration to directors everywhere, male and female. In French New Wave that we'd covered already, there was one director who was a woman in the whole thing, Agnes Varda. She just died this year. She was 90 years old. And she was the same age as all Jean-Luc Godard and Francois Truffaut and the rest of them. And her film that put her on the map was called Chloe, From 5 to 7. And it's essentially, you could probably see it on YouTube. I think they have the whole thing on YouTube. It's essentially about a woman who's walking around kind of aimlessly around Paris, and she goes to the doctor, and the doctor says they think she has cancer. She spends the rest of the day kind of floating around Paris. Not big plot, not a lot of story going on. And as the day goes on, she kind of goes from being sad and depressed, thinking that's it for her, to kind of like, oh, maybe life isn't so bad. Maybe she should enjoy what she has in front of her. Well, they find out towards the end of the movie that she does not have cancer, so she's going to live. Everything's going to turn out okay. But it's just kind of a day in the life of a woman who just got some bad news. And she was one of the only women in the French New Wave that was a director. And so, but she was highly respected in France for many, many years. She went on mostly to direct lots of documentaries. Her last documentary was about herself, actually. It just came out about a year or two ago, and she was 89 when she was making it. And she's quite a powerful force in cinema and inspiration to anybody who wants to pick up a camera. And when the odds are against you, like they were with most women of her day, you keep pushing through because you have no choice. You're a filmmaker and you have no choice. You want to tell the story. She's a great inspiration. And as we go up a little further, remember we just saw the documentary I made you guys watch called Easy Rider Raging Bulls. You did the quiz. If you notice, there's not a woman director in the whole bit. There wasn't. Also, I talked about black exploitation films. There's no African American directors in that whole pantheon. They weren't invited into the system of white Hollywood or male dominated Hollywood. And so you don't really see any women directors busting out with films in the 70s or really the 80s. But later on, there was some inroads. And I would say started in the 90s with the Sundance Film Institute and with independent directors like Susan Sideman, and who did Desperately Seeking Susan, and Sarah Driver, who's an independent film director married to Jim Jarmusch, the other independent film director. She did some art films in New York, and also Allison Anders, who started her career after she went to UCLA. She got a production job on Wim Wenders' film Paris, Texas, and he kind of mentored her. And then she got to make a film called Border Radio, film for $50,000-$60,000. Started some authentic LA punk musicians like John Doe from X and Chris D from the Flesh Eaters and the Divine Horsemen. There's a scene at Madame Wong's with a band called Green on Red. I was living in LA at the time, and so Madame Wong's is a cool punk club that was downtown Chinatown, LA, and there's a couple scenes with from the Blasters. He's in it too. The guitar player from the Blasters. I'm drawing a blank on his name right now. So she used musicians as actors because she was very much into the music scene, and so she got these guys to do it for free. It's a decent enough movie. It's just this guy, he's just trying to figure out what to do with his life. He's living on a beach in Mexico. So it's got this existential angst to it, and it got her put on the map. And then later on, she made some really good films. Her best one to me is called Gas, Food, and Lodging. And but she went on to direct Mi Loco Vita and I think she's directing television right now. Her and I are similar age, and so she still is a true believer. And the power of DIY, do it yourself. But she also got some Hollywood gigs by directing television. And so there's another one that you can look up. Allison Anders. I will put this in the list. You'll see it. You don't have to remember it, but go check some of her stuff out. At least check out the trailers. Another one would be Francis Ford Coppola's daughter. She's turned out to be a pretty fine director. If you ever get a chance to see Lost in Translation, I think that's a really great film with a young Scarlett Johansson before she became this monster that she is now. Sorry, folks, if you love her. Um, and Bill Murray. It's a dry comedy set in Tokyo, Japan, and it's quite brilliant. Lost in Translation, check it out. She also directed The Virgin Suicides, and she's still out there making films. But she is Francis Ford Coppola, the guy who directed Godfather, The Conversation, and Apocalypse Now. That's his daughter, so she's got an easier way into the Hollywood system. So sometimes that happens. Another woman who had kind of a clout in the system before she even got started was Catherine Bigelow. And because at the time, she was married to James Cameron, who went on to direct Titanic, Avatar, and the rest. She started directing films, and she's directed a couple of my favorite films. She directs very masculine movies, I guess you might say it. They're not chick light, as a lot of people will accuse some of these filmmakers of making, which is a real derogatory term, by the way. But she directed Near Dark, which is one of the best vampire movies ever made. And I don't like vampire movies. This one is rock and roll, folks, punk rock. And Michelle did Point Break. Maybe you've seen it. Keanu Reeves is a surfer dude, FBI agent, and what's his name? Patrick Swayze. They're bank robber surfers in Southern California. Really good action film. Catherine usually directs male-oriented action films, and she directed later on. She directed The Hurt Locker. Maybe you've seen it, set in the Afghanistan war. It won the Academy Award for Best Director, and I don't know about Best Movie, but Best Director at least, and possibly Best Film. And she's the first woman in the history of the Oscars to ever win an Oscar, and which is a big deal at the time. And then later on, she did Zero Dark 30 about the killing of Osama bin Laden. So she did, and her last film that got a big release was called Detroit, about the Detroit riots, the race riots in the late 60s. So she makes hard driving films that have nothing, they would not be described as chick light. She's another one that's really powerful. There's James Campion from Australia. So there's a lot of powerful women out there, but they still have struggled to get their films made because they're not considered commercial enough for Hollywood. If you notice, they don't get to direct Star Wars. They don't get to direct the sequels to X-Men, but things are changing a bit. But it's funny. A woman directed Wonder Woman superhero. I guess a guy couldn't direct that. So they go, a woman would understand it. So a woman did direct that. And so they're making inroads. So I want you guys to look at some of these clips as you go on line this week. I'm going to make you watch this one thing, Mojo that I like, Mojo Top 10 Women Directors. These are all new directors. It's only 10 minutes long. And it gives you some insight to some of these newer directors. I'm not naming all of them right now, but they're there. So go look at that on YouTube. Mojo's Top 10 Female Directors. It doesn't go back to Ida Lupino and those people. It's mostly deals with people right now. Penny Marshall's another one who just died recently. And not that many. But they make powerful films, and we really shouldn't judge the sex of a film. Who in the hell's directing it? What sex are they? Who cares? Is it a good story, well told? That's all I care about. Anyway, and that's what to look for. On that happy note, this is my spiel on female directors. Go check some of this stuff. I will put this in the announcements. Some of these directors go look for. And maybe we'll have a discussion about some of these films. I wish you could sync some of these out on your own. Yes, you might even enjoy them. Don't think of them as torture. And yes, most of them are in color. Not the Ida Lupino movies. not the connection, but most of the newer ones are in color. So have no fear. Color will save the day. Anyway, on that, like I said, this week I'll make the announcement on the last couple of assignments. So keep watching the movie. Keep the faith that this is going to end. We'll get through this stuff. Don't drop out of the class because you're falling behind. We can make up points. I'm getting a lot of emails from people who don't have the technology or they've fallen behind their assignments. Make them up. Let's go. You can do it. We're too close to the end. It's about 7 weeks away. You're too close. You've gone too far. Let's don't stop now. So please stick it out. And if you're having trouble, text me. Call me on the phone. Yes, I'll speak to you. Okay. And on that note, I will see you later on this week. And I'm still continuing your papers. I did finish Sunset Boulevard finally. Now I'm on to the French New Wave. Have patience. We all have to have patience through this. Anyway, this is my longest lecture. I'll shut up now. And I'll see you in a couple days. Peace out.